Hey, dear readers, welcome back to another edition of Drive Time, where I talk about stuff unprompted. You say you folks like this? You like listening to me while you're doing other tasks? Quilt making, cross country skiing. Maybe you're building a deck. I don't know, but I'm here to keep you company. So today is a geeky day. It's somewhat well. It's very related to comics. Um, People tell me they like the inside baseball kind of stuff, the granular little bits of comic book trivia from my past that I remember. And today's subject is going to be lunchtime. I hope you're not hungry because you will be by the end of this video. I know I will. Uh, so, um, many times I've talked about lunch meetings, memorable lunch meetings when I went up to New York City to visit DC or Marvel, and a lot of business got done over meals. And mostly it was an excuse for the editors to get out of the office and spend a little of their company's money, use up some of that expense account they had. And so let's get down to it. I'm going to break it down by the two companies that I most often went to lunch with. Well, let's go to lunch with Marvel. My very first lunch with at Marvel was with Larry Hama. Now, when Larry first started buying scripts from me for Savage Tales and later King Kull backup scripts for Savage Sword of Conan, in one of our phone calls, I suggested that maybe he might want to have me up for lunch. And his response was, "Why the F would I want to have lunch with you?" That's Larry. That's so Larry. And I said, "Okay, I just thought, that's what you guys did." And he goes, "Nah, I don't want to know." So later, he did invite me, which I thought, okay, this is a big deal. He's not inviting me up just to have lunch. There's got to be a reason. And I had been pestering him for months about writing scripts for the lead feature in Savage Sword of Conan. I kept pitching Conan stories, and he kept telling me to go away. He had Conan writers, and he had Michael Fleischer and Larry Yakata and Don Krar, and he didn't need any more Conan writers. So I didn't know in the background, I pretty much just learned this recently, that Gary Kwapis, who was doing an awful lot of Savage Sword of Conan work and had been made the regular Savage Sword of Conan artists, he was complaining about the scripts because they basically sucked. In his opinion, maybe yours too if he read them. So in the middle of all this, here I am pitching away. Hey, what if Conan did this and then Conan did that, and here's a really cool Conan werewolf story. And Larry's like, "Go away, stop that, stop sending me these things." Now, at the same time, Larry's going around the Marvel offices recommending me to people because I had certainly proven I knew how to use a calendar and I kept my promises and I didn't pester him all the time and I didn't need my hand held when I wrote and I followed his suggestions and took his criticism well. And so he was recommending me to other offices at Marvel. So it wasn't that Larry wasn't being nice to me. He just wanted me to stay away from Conan. Well, anyway, he invites me up for lunch. I know, okay, this is momentous. And he and his assistant at the time, Pat Redding, and I, we go to Lorango, which is a place I would learn to be very familiar with because it was the number one, in my experience anyway, it was the number one choice for lunch for most of the Marvel editors. And so we end up at Lorango's, really cool Southwest sort of Tex-Mex Mexican restaurant. Love Mexican food. And we have a nice lunch. And Larry's talking because Larry talks a lot. And I love to hear Larry talk because I love to listen. I never had too many conversations with Larry. It was mostly him talking, me listening. And believe me, I appreciated every minute. The guy is just freaking fascinating. All right. So he's talking about this, talking about that. Pat's not talking a lot. She never did. And this is where I've told this story before in detail, but this is where he offered me the slot as regular writer on Savage Sword of Conan. That I would write every issue, 12 issue a year. And I would be, teamed with Gary Kwapis, and the rest is history. comic book history. Gary Quapis, my most frequent collaborator over all of these years, even more than Graham Nolan. I worked with Gary a lot on various projects up until just a few years ago. And so that was my first lunch with Larry. Now, a few months later, I visit the offices, and he asked me if I want to go to lunch again. And I said, great. But between the time he invited me and the time I showed up, Jim Shooter got fired. He got fired the day before I show up for my second lunch with Larry. Well, all business is off the table now. Jim Shooter got fired. This is an event. This is an earth-shaking, game-changing event at Marvel. And so Larry says, well, you can still go to lunch with me, but we won't talk any business because we're just going to have this big old lunch with everybody. You know, it's basically a farewell Jim Shooter lunch. And so we go to Larango once again, and we're in the back room. They have this back like dining room and this long table. And at the end of the table is an empty seat, and that's Jim Shooter's seat. And then all these people show up, all of these Marvel editors and assistant editors. And then people start showing up from outside. Walt Simonson shows up. John Byrne shows up. Mike Carlin comes down from DC to have this farewell Jim Shooter lunch. And this was basically Jim Shooter's Legion of Supervillains. This was the anti-Jim Shooter squad. And it was all people who had problems in the past with Jim Shooter. Larry Hama had famously had actual real problems with Jim Shooter. There were some differences of opinion, let us say, between the two. The rest of them, I've figured out over the years, didn't like Jim Shooter because he made them work hard. Now, John Byrne and Walt Simonson had some creative differences with how Jim Shooter worked. I shared those creative differences. I didn't like Jim Shooter's rock hard theories on comic book storytelling and some of the sweeping changes he made to the Marvel Universe and things like that. I personally didn't care for them, but I never had to deal with them because I was working with Larry Hama. And I was doing stuff that was outside of the Marvel superhero realm. And so Jim Shooter didn't give a damn about me. Probably didn't even know who I was, didn't know my name, wouldn't know me if if I jumped in the bathtub with him. So because I was over in Larry's corner, and Larry protected his corner. Jim Shooter, first of all, had no interest in G.I. Joe, Savage Sword of Conan, all the rest. And also, Larry actively kept Jim Shooter out of his business. And the thing is that Larry was so wildly successful at Marvel with the G.I. Joe book, and Savage Sword of Conan, the Conan books were earners. They made money. And the G.I. Joe book was the #1 best-selling book at Marvel. So there was no touching Larry. Okay, he was the golden child off there in his dark little corner office. And but this was a lunch, and I got to meet all of these people that I otherwise would not have met, all in a gang, and they were all sitting around sharing anecdotes about Jim Shooter. So that was my second lunch at Marvel. Now, when I got onto Alien Legion, Archie Goodwin, who was the editor of Alien Legion, had me up a few times, and he and Carl Potts Carl Potts was an editor at Marvel. He had created Alien Legion along with Frank Scirocco, but Archie was the editor. But so Archie would have Carl and I believe sometimes Marcus McLaurin, who was Carl's associate editor, and we would go out to lunch on Archie's expense account. And with Archie, it was always sushi. And I don't eat sushi. I don't like raw fish. What are you, crazy? It's like picking something up off the sidewalk and eating it, isn't it? So I would always get the teriyaki chicken and rice. I was the white boy at the sushi restaurant, and I ordered something safe. If they had a cheeseburger, I probably would have ordered that. And it was always always a blast having lunch with Archie. No matter what we were eating, it didn't matter. As you've always heard, nicest, most charming guy ever to work in comics. Always a blast to work with him. And of course, I idolized the man. I write comics because of Archie Goodwin. I'm in comics because of Steve Ditko. I write them because of Archie Goodwin. He's the first writer I ever paid attention to. Now, another guy I frequently went to lunch with was Don Daly. Don Daly, legendary bon vivant, boulevardier, and ladies' man, Don Daly. And when I was working on Punisher, we would go out to lunch often. He loved going out to lunch, and he loved taking a whole gang of people with him. So, I remember Dan Slott, who, Marvel writer now, but he worked in art returns then. But Don liked him, and he liked his ideas, and he would often invite him to go to lunch with us. And so there was always a whole gang of people walking over to, yes, Lorango's to have lunch with Don Daly. And at the end of every meal, Don had to, write, pay for it with his expensive card, his credit card, his Marvel expense account card. And he always had to write, and every editor always did this, they had to write on the back of the receipt who was at lunch with them. Well, he could never write down Dan Slott because there was no reason. He couldn't justify taking Dan Slott to lunch on Marvel's time because at the time, Dan was just returning original artwork. He was basically, packing stuff up and mailing it off. That was his job, and keeping the original art sorted. So Don couldn't justify Dan being at the lunches, even though Dan contributed. He's an idea man. He's just firing stuff off. He had that enthusiasm of youth, where he's like, "What about this? What about this? What about this? What about this?" And you just couldn't keep up with the guy. But as valuable as he was, Marvel didn't see it that way. That was not his job description. And so Don would always say, "Who should I put down?" Who should I put down instead of Dan's name? I always suggested Mobius, but Don never went for it. Usually the default guy was Klaus Janson, because everybody loves Klaus Janson. He's one of these, like Archie, just a super popular guy within the industry. I've never heard a bad word said about Klaus. And he's always fun to go to lunch with. I've been to lunch with Klaus a number of times, mostly at DC. And so Klaus, if you're listening to this, you were at a lot of lunches you weren't aware of. You were like the default guy. I'm sure anybody checking the receipts at Marvel carefully would find that maybe Klaus was at 2 or 3 lunches that day, one of which he possibly even was at. He was even present for. So that was lunchtime at Marvel. So there were a few other weird lunches. Don got me involved with the Punisher crossover with a couple of the other Marvel editors, Danny Fingeroth, and Ralph Macchio and Bob Budiansky, who were like the inner circle of the Marvel universe at the time, along with Mark Grunwald. But sometimes we went to a lunch with them one time, and that was weird because those 3 guys just sort of spent the whole lunchtime sniping at each other, and it was very strange. And no work got done. Absolutely no work got done at that meeting. And the resulting crossover, I think it was called Dead Man's Hand. It's apparent in that crossover there was not a lot of work done at that lunch. There was not a lot of coordination on that crossover. I defy you to read that crossover. I think it went from, was it Ghost Rider to Daredevil to Punisher? I'm not real sure what 3 comics were involved in Dead Man's Hand, but it was a mess, total mess. I was completely lost and kind of infuriated. Anyway, that's lunch at Marvel. Let's move on to DC, where I spent a lot more time and a lot more lunches. So we'll start with Denny O'Neil. If he had his choice, we would have gone to an Indian restaurant every time. Several times he got outvoted, but usually we ended up at this Indian restaurant within easy walking distance of the DC offices. Denny was a vegetarian at the time. I don't know if he continued to be a vegetarian for the rest of his life. And so he could, he could eat at an Indian restaurant, which is good, because if you're a vegetarian and you go to an Indian restaurant, you're still going to get protein, because all of the combined foods in Indian food, even without meat, give you protein requirements. I don't know if that was Denny's reasoning. I think he just liked Indian food. And so we would end up there. Now, I'd never had Indian food before, and I kind of needed a guide. So then he said, well, the brown stuff's good, the green stuff's good, the red stuff, maybe not so much. And there's rice, and there's naan bread. And I said, yeah, no, naan bread, it's bread. I can see it. little Indian food humor there. Anyway, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. My wife didn't love it so much because Indian food is garlic rich, and I would come home, you know, smelling like a salami, and she didn't like it. um, I always wondered that nobody on the train going home objected to the way I smelled. It was probably because they'd all smelled like garlic too. I think everybody in New York City smells like garlic because the food always seems to be so garlic rich. So anyway, Denny, it was Indian food unless he got outvoted. And I loved it. I thought it was terrific. And I still like Indian food today when I can get away with it. Now, what was problematic about going out with the guys from the Bat Office is Jordan Gorfinkel was part of the Bat editorial staff, the talented Jordan Gorfinkel, the creator of the Birds of Prey. A longtime editor, a longtime friend. I was in communication with him recently. Jordan is a practicing Jew and very serious about his religion, and which I've always respected highly because it's not easy. It's not easy being, a hard-ass Jew. And one of the inconveniences, of course, is he had to eat kosher. And so often he could not go out to eat with us. He would either eat lunch before or after. He would go to lunch, but wouldn't eat. Have a glass of water, a piece of bread. Many times he stayed back at the offices, and he would not be present at the meetings, which wasn't fair. But also, Jordan realized that maybe we wouldn't want to go to a Jewish restaurant. He wasn't going to impose a Jewish restaurant on us the way Denny was imposing Indian restaurants on us. But Jordan, I love that guy. Gorf comes up with a solution. He finds 2 kosher restaurants that are kosher that are not Jewish cuisine. Finds an incredible, believe it or not, kosher Chinese restaurant. Food was awesome. Absolutely great. Some of the best Chinese food I've ever had. And it was kosher. So Jordan could go to lunch with us. Hooray. The other one he found was this restaurant. I don't think it's there anymore. Restaurants come and go. With COVID, they all went. It was a restaurant called My Favorite Dessert. And it was a kosher Italian restaurant. And again, it was absolutely awesome. I mean, what a service he did. He wanted to be at the lunch, but he didn't want to inconvenience anybody. So he picked 2 incredible restaurants. And the Italian restaurant, just amazing Italian restaurant. And more about Jordan, when we would go to the BAT conferences, when we would go to the summits and retreats, we'd be up there and they'd have these lavish buffets for us to eat, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's like whatever you wanted. It was just, we were treated like kings, except Jordan, because there wasn't any kosher offerings there. The only kosher offerings they had were these pre-prepared meals that looked horrible. They came in one of those like aluminum pans with a cardboard top, and they just did not look appealing. And Jordan brought stuff with him so he could subsist over the 3-day retreat. And I remember one time, it was probably our last retreat with with Denny's gang. Jordan said, after we stopped working for the day, he said, "I'm heading back to the city." And we were like, what is there something wrong? And he goes, "No, I just want a decent meal." So he drove back to the city so that he could have a decent dinner, and then came back that evening. So later that evening. So anyway, so let's move on to Scott Peterson. Scott Peterson's number one choice every time was a place called Pasta de Oro, and it was just around the corner from DC. Another absolutely incredible Italian restaurant. and one that often Klaus Janson accompanied us in person. We didn't have to fake his name on the back of a receipt. He would actually be there. We had some terrific lunches there. Flint Henry went a bunch of times. My favorite and Flint Henry's favorite was a dish, a penne dish that was made with vodka. And of course, all the vodka was gone from it. You couldn't get drunk eating it, but man, it was awesome. And talk about garlic. My wife really hated it when I ate at Pasta de Oro and came home because it was there were actual cloves of garlic in the pasta, but it was awesome, absolutely awesome. And we had some great meetings there and got a lot of terrific business done at Pasta de Oro. Now, one funny side note, or at least I find it funny, is one of the bad editors was Darren Vincenzo, and as you might guess, was part Italian. Um, and whenever, for some reason, and he looked very Italian. Darren looks very, Sicilian. He looks like he could have been one of the Medici's. I mean, he's just got that look, you know. And he, whenever he would show up, the real Italian people that ran Pasta de Oro would make this huge fuss over him. 6 of us would be walking in the door for a lunch meeting, and they would pick him out, and they would go, Darren, Darren. They just loved Darren, and he would get kind of embarrassed about it. But for whatever reason, they just like adopted him like a son, and we would get all kinds of like extra appetizers, extra portions, and everything else because Darren was with us, the fabulous Darren, their prodigal son. Scott always joked that he would he always threatened to Darren that he would tell the people that Darren was actually half Irish, which he was, but he never did. But always a good time at Pasta de Oro. Also, Rosie O'Grady's was another place. It was real close to DC. It was a sort of imitation Irish pub, huge place, famous. I guess it is actually an Irish pub. It's it goes back forever, and I think that was Mike Carlin's favorite place. The few times I went out to lunch where Mike Carlin picked the place. Now another amusing lunchtime story, mildly amusing, was Kevin Dooley invited me to write Guy Gardner, and he said, "Why don't you come up to have lunch?" Well, I'd already agreed. I mean, you don't have to buy me lunch. I'll write Guy Gardner for you. I want to work with Joe Staton. Real bad. I like Joe. I love his artwork. I love his storytelling. I'm sold. I'm sold. So he said, well, I have some ideas for it and come up and we'll have lunch. I'm like, well, at that time I was going up to DC at least once a month all the time because I thought it was a good idea to visit the offices and fly the flag. Because if they didn't see you in person at the comic book companies, they didn't see you in person for a long time, they tended to forget about you. But if you were in the offices, you almost always came home with some kind of extra work, or at least, got something done, or got to pitch, or whatever. So once a month, at least, and sometimes every 2 weeks, I would spend a day up at DC, go up in the morning, come back in the evening. And so I thought, okay, I'll come up and have lunch with you, Kevin. So we go out, and Kevin, for some reason, thinks he has to impress me. I mean, I've already agreed to do the job. And he takes me to this like Nouvelle Cuisine restaurant with, the fancy tablecloths and a maitre d', and everybody's, the wait staff's all dressed formally. And, it's, I can't remember the name of the place, but it's like restaurants you see in movies where rich people are eating. And it's probably fabulously expensive. And like I said, it was Nouvelle Cuisine. So I order something like, some sort of fish thing and some vegetables. And what comes out, if you've never been to one of these places, it's this enormous plate with very little on it. It's like a piece of fish that would have been rejected as a fish fillet sandwich at McDonald's. It would have been too small. And it's got like a design drizzled on it in sauce. It's like supposed to look like something. And then there's like 3 green beans and a carrot carved to look like a flower. And that's lunch. I'm like, okay, is this like, The appetizer? I was like, no, this is the main course. So we eat, and it's pretty obvious I'm not really pleased. And Kevin's apologizing. I thought, I'd impress you. And I'm like, I don't need to be impressed, Kevin. I like you. I want to work on the book. Everything's cool. So we get back to the office. He's continuing to apologize. I'm like, look, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Do you have any pretzels? Is there anything to eat around here? I think I actually went to the vending machines in the break room at DC and got some cookies or something. I was starving. We had lunch and I was still hungry, something I had never experienced in my comic career. I mean, I always walked away from a comic book lunch stuff like a tick because it was free food. And I remember I got a couple of slices of pizza when I got to Penn Station before I went home because I was starving after my quote unquote lunch with Kevin Dooley. Now I'll leave you with this. This is another Archie Goodwin story, but this time at DC Comics. And Archie, once again, nicest guy, most charming guy. But he had a little bit of a dark side. So I was visiting with my friend Clint McElroy, who is a enormous radio personality in the Midwest. He broadcasts out of West Virginia. I don't think he's still in radio, but he and his sons have an enormously popular podcast now. He's like a big deal. And he and I, he had some comic ideas he wanted to pitch, and Archie said, he'd be willing to listen to them. And so we went on up. And it was also the DC Christmas party, which I've talked a little bit about. But we were up there for a few days and had a great time. Clint knew how to do the town. He's fantastic company. There's a reason why he's a well-known radio personality in his region, because he's just charming as hell and funny all the time. I mean, it's like having your own improv troupe whenever you're with Clint. So Archie invites us out to lunch at the top of the Sixes. At this time, DC Comics was headquartered in the 666 building, the Warner building on Fifth Avenue. And maybe it was on Park. I can't remember. Anyway, no, it was Fifth. So he takes us to the top of the Sixes, which, as you might guess, is a restaurant at the very top, the penthouse of this 666 skyscraper. And as we're walking in, the maitre d' comes out. This is another one of those fancy places. And he comes out and he says, smoking or non-smoking, because this was the 80s. And Archie looks at the guy deadpan and says, I'm dying of cancer, so it doesn't really matter to me. Now, Clint and I are in on the quote-unquote joke because Archie had been diagnosed with lymphoma just before this and was being treated and would be treated 3 more times for lymphoma before it finally took him. But the first few treatments were very successful, I should say. But the look on this waiter's face, and of course we're in on the joke. We're stifling, we're half stifling laughter and half being appalled at what Archie just said. And but boy, Archie enjoyed it. He had the biggest smile on his face all the way through lunch. Kept thinking about how the maitre d's expression. So there you go. This was lunchtime at the Big Two. And I forgot to, for those of you actually watching, forgot to put up the second image for DC when I switched to that segment. I'm sorry. Here it is. For those of you just listening, don't worry, you didn't miss anything. You can check it out later on YouTube, right here at the big channel. So anyway, that's it. So keep your eyes on the road. Careful with those power tools. And boy, that quilt looks great. How long have you been working on that? And that's it. I will see you down the road. Bye-bye.